What term do you use to identify your native heritage?
Up until a few months ago, we identified ourselves as Creek, but now so many things have changed. So now we've decided that we're just going to go with Muscogee and drop the Creek. We were called Creeks from the British because we lived near creeks.
Tell us a little bit about your family history in Bixby and how that connects to your Muscogee heritage.
My grandmother received her creek allotment land in Bixby as well as the rest of her family. And she was 12 years old when she received hers. And I live probably about a mile away from where her land originally was.
What are your earliest memories of seeing native art?
It would have been in school, living in Bixby. Before it was statehood, it was Indian Territory. So there was still a lot of native artwork, even though we didn't receive it so much in school, but we did learn some of it.
And was that baskets or pottery?
I think basically then it was probably just mostly like drawing.
So when was it that you first got involved in weaving baskets?
It started probably in around 2001, and I had been working with the Creek Council House Museum in Muscogee, and I had been teaching pottery, and we got to where we only had one elderly basket weaver. Her name was Hepsy Gilroy. So Ted Isham was more or less the director of the museum. So he said, I want you to meet with Hepsy. So I did, but her health was so bad that really we just talked. We didn't do any weaving. So Ted said, we need a basket weaver, so I want you to learn everything you can and be our basket teacher.
Now you're a professional. So we know that you started working with pottery originally, as you just stated, but what specifically about clay drew you to using that medium?
I think it's forgiving.
And how did you transition from clay sculptures to basket weaving?
From Ted Isham. And so for those several years, I just kind of quit doing pottery and focused on basketry.
So where do you gather your materials and how?
When I use river cane, the place that I get it is probably about an hour and a half away from my home. It was a great spot for gathering until about 3 years ago, and we had a flood come through. And at that time, river cane supposedly loves fire and flood, but it's been 3 years and I'm still waiting on it to generate itself enough so that I can make a basket. Last time I went there, there was like only enough for like 13 stalks, enough to make a small basket. But river cane, to me, it's like we're losing it, less and less of it. And it was such an important material that I think eventually, if someone doesn't step in, I think river cane will become extinct.
So what do you use now if you can't use the river cane?
I use binder cane, or I even use yucca, palmetto, honeysuckle, just about anything that I can weave with.
So did you learn anything about gathering your natural materials from the earth?
Yes, I've learned, for one thing, as far as river cane, it's labor intensive. So you have to really be dedicated to basketry if you're going to be working with river cane.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the double false braid rim?
The double false braid rim was the traditional rim used on Muscogee Creek basketry. It hadn't been done for 100 to 150 years. In 2005, I revived it. At that time, we had Joyce Spare, and she was in our cultural department. So she brought one of the older creek baskets from her family, and so I just had it to look at. It's 2 rounds, and so the first round, it was fairly easy, so I had that down. But on the second round of it, it took me 2 weeks to finally figure it out. And it was on a Friday morning, and I came into the museum because I was at the museum every day because I wanted to be there, hopefully whenever I had it finished. And I was just tired of working on it, so I said to Ted Isham, I said, today is going to be the day. And about an hour and a half later, I take it into him, and I saw him, and I said, I think this is it, but I'm not sure. And Ted looked at it, he said, you got it, it's it.
So when you started out, were you incorporating dyes into your art, or did that come later?
Well, as Creeks, or I should say Muscogee, we really did not use dyes on our materials. everything basically we used was for utilitarian purposes. And so it wasn't until later that they may have a few ceremonial baskets with color, but not that much. And the natural dyes that I use with bloodroot, we don't have any in my area, but over in Cherokee country, which I have Cherokee friends, I go over and we dig our bloodroot, and then I use walnut. And I am lucky that I have a walnut tree in my yard.
So tell us about your first trip to Moundville. What brought you here and what was it like seeing it for the first time?
My first trip here was in 2009. I was here to work on the cloak, and that was the first year I did the festival. But when I arrived here at Alabama and we came to Moundville, it's just like, I can't explain it, but it's just a feeling you get when you're here. It just makes you feel so good, and I don't know if it's maybe ancestral, but it's just a great place to be.
So we know you've been coming to Moundville Native American Festival for many years. So what do you do when you come to the festival?
When I'm here at the festival, I will demonstrate basketry. I would bring my mats. I make 3-foot by 5-foot mats, and I would bring my mats and talk to the children about the mats, and I would bring pottery. I think on the last time I did bring, I was working on a twined skirt. So it's just various things that I'll do. I also make corn husk dolls.
So what do you enjoy most about coming to the festival?
I enjoy the most being here at the festival is seeing the children. I never had any children, so I can really enjoy children. I can spend my time with them, then they go home to their parents.
That's awesome. So have you gotten to meet many other artists here working at the festival and form relationships with them?
Yes, I have made a lot of friends here at Moundville through the years, and it's very talented people that I'm with. And while I was here working on the cloak, it was so many great artists were here then, and so it was just a great, joyous time to be here.
So you mentioned that you were making twined bags. Can you explain what twined bags are and what they're used for?
Twining is it's a tight weave, and so it's the same repetitive motion over and over again. Whenever I'm twining, I just use jute. But back when the natives were twining, they would go out and have to gather, they could have used dog bane, and so it would have been dried out, broken down, then you beat it and pull the fibers out, and then from there you twist it and make the yarn, and then finally you're on the construction of whatever you're making. So then it would have taken a lot of time and energy to have made clothing and bags. But bags were used for storage. They were even used a twining technique, not a bag, but to make a mantle, make skirts. Skirts were worn then. And then when you did have the skirts, you left the fringe long on the bottom, and that was to deter insects from you when you walked.
You've also made a bandolier bag, correct? Could you tell us about that?
I started making a bandolier bag, and I was taking a class from Martha Berry. She is a well-known Cherokee beater. I started it, but it was a long-term bag. It took me 5 years to finish it. I would get it out every year and maybe bead a flower. Well, whenever I first started, I was gung-ho on it. So I finished the whole pouch, and then I started up the sash. And so I'd be like, okay, this winter I'm gonna finish it. I would get it out and then do one flower and then put it back. And so finally, I did get it finished, and I took it to Cherokee, North Carolina to a show, and it won best in traditional beadwork.
Speaking of awards, I love your woven mats, and I know some of your woven mats have won awards in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
The first mat that I made, it was 3-foot by 5-foot, and it has really made the rounds. I entered it into shows, and then Red River Museum in Idabel, Oklahoma, purchased it for their collections. But at that time, they left it back in collections, and then they finally said it was too pretty, and so they brought it out and put it on permanent exhibit. When I make a mat, it takes over 400 hours. I quit counting once I've got 400 hours because I know I'm on my way down.
What has been one of the most important awards that you've won, and what is it for?
I had entered a mat into the Cherokee show at the Hard Rock Casino in Tulsa, and it won Best of Class.
What has been your most rewarding piece to create?
The cloak has been my favorite piece that I have made. I said, that is my crowning glory. Of everything I've done, it's like that is, I think, my favorite piece.
So we've been told that these figures in the museum have been modeled after real people, and the Paramount Chief who's wearing your cape is actually your friend Jay. Could you tell us a little bit about him?
Jay McGirt, very, very talented artist. We lost him not that long ago, which was a big loss to the Creek Nation. Jay was an absolute fantastic beater. He was a clothing maker. He did pottery, just a very talented person.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you're wearing today?
So my earrings were made by Dan Townsend. My necklace was made by Dan Townsend. Dan, I believe, is the best shell carver that I know. This is a Creek Seminole skirt. It was made by Jay, and I love it. When I wear it, I said I feel like the Indian princess, even though there was not an Indian princess.
How were you commissioned to come down to Moundville to work on this cape?
I was given a call by Betsy, and she said, would I come down and work on the cape? Well, it wasn't something that I had done before, so I was like, well, I don't know if I can do that or not. And she was like, oh, yes, you can. Come on down. So that's how it got me here.
What was it like working here among all the other artists who were doing things for the museum?
Oh, we had so many talented artists. It was so good to watch everything that was being created. We had Chip Winty, and he was working on the jewelry. Jay did a lot of the work. He worked on the palanquin. We had Dan Townsend here, the shell carver. We had Tammy Bean here for the copper work. It was just a great group.
Can you tell us a little bit about the materials for the cape?
When I first got here, I was brought the feathers from 30 wild Alabama turkeys, and they have like a coppery look to them, absolutely beautiful. Then I ran out of feathers, but during that time, it was about a 2-week period, the city of Columbus, Georgia located me here and had me make a burial basket. It was the whole body, the whole torso of a Creek man. So the basket was probably 2.5, maybe 3, and wide, about this tall, and with a lid. So then, when my feathers came in, they came in from up north, and so they had a little bit different color tone to them. They had a little green color to them, but it all blended in. And the white feathers and the colored feathers are goose feathers. All the other feathers are turkey feathers.
And then at the bottom?
And at the bottom, we have olive shells. And so they would have, when the chief would have been walking, they would have rattled, and I'm sure made a beautiful sound.
So how long did it take overall to finish?
I was here for 3.5 months, but really I spent 3 months working on it. It was like every feather sewn individually. The construction of the cape, though, has a netting behind it, and the netting was made by Walter Gowan. The netting is a form of twining.
What does it mean to you to have your artwork displayed in the museum and to be here at Moundville and know that you always have a piece in here?
I love it that the piece is on permanent exhibit here, so every time I come, I have to make sure that I come and take a look at it.
How do you sign your baskets?
I do not sign my baskets. Whenever I very first started making them, I would dye a little piece of river cane and stick down the side, and then I just kept forgetting to put it in. So I just I can look at my baskets and know that it's my baskets, and then I put a braided rim around the top. And so usually when I see another basket with the braid around it, I know that has been one of my students.
We know you've taught many workshops for Muscogee communities and the general public. Can you tell us about that?
I love teaching. I have worked a lot with the Muscogee Creek, but because really we were down to one basket weaver. I did have a student, a college student, Aisha Phillips, and she mentored under me for about 3 months. And as Creeks, we had a set of baskets, and it's 4 baskets, and it's a corn processing. So Aisha was with me long enough to where she completed all of the baskets for herself.
Have you ever tried to incorporate some of the Mississippian motifs like those here at Moundville into your work?
Not into my basketry. As Muscogee Creek's, our basketry was plain, so we just had really about 3 different techniques that we used, and one we call paired weaving, and it was you would take 2 splints and weave 2 splints at a time, and then it was woven in like a herringbone pattern.
Do you continue to research your basketry and woven objects today?
Yes, I think you can never have enough knowledge. I go to museums in Oklahoma mostly and go through the collections and study, measure, and go home and try to reproduce them.
If you could give your younger self artistic advice, what would you say?
Start earlier. I did not really start doing artwork until I was 42.
How has your artwork progressed over the years?
Well, whenever I first started making pottery, I took my first pieces to the 5 Civilized Tribes Museum in Oklahoma just for them to look at them. And they were getting ready to have a festival, so they said, are they for sale? And I was so surprised. I'm like, do you want to buy them? So I took about 15 and they purchased every one of them, and they said they sold so fast.
What are you working on right now that you're especially excited about?
Right now I'm getting ready to start another mat. I just finished up a twined skirt, and it probably took me maybe 100 hours to work on it, and it would have been worn about 1000 AD. When I go home, I know I'm going to be all inspired. When I do make a trip or I go to a museum, then I go home and I'm inspired to create, do pottery, make baskets, so it gets me going.
What legacy do you want to leave for future Native artists?
Hopefully that they would go into basketry or pottery, and that the knowledge that we have gained so far would not be lost.